Nixon's policies as he tried to get peace with honour. Well, the first one to tell you about is Vietnamisation. The American public were fed up of the American deaths in a war that they didn't seem to be winning particularly quickly, or maybe even winning at all, according to the things they'd seen in 1968, and one that America couldn't even necessarily claim to be on a rightful moral crusade because of what they'd seen with My Lai. So one of Nixon's ideas, which on the face of it seems like a good one, is to, instead of get the Americans to do the fighting, to get the Americans to train the South Vietnamese and to give the South Vietnamese American weapons so that they can do the fighting. To try to transform the war of more of one where America's fighting most of it to more of a civil war where it's South versus North. And so this whole thing was called Vietnamisation. It didn't work. Because the South just were no match for the North. For whatever reason, and you don't need to know the reasons, but that's basically it. The South Vietnamese forces were no match for the North Vietnamese forces. It was a good idea, and if they had been a match for it, it would have been perfect, because America could have left and carried on supplying the South Vietnamese potentially, but no Americans would have died, because they wouldn't have been there, and the whole problem would have been solved. The flaw in the problem was the South Vietnamese armed forces were just not effective enough to be able to continue the fight indefinitely. So that's the first one. In the meantime, whilst this was going on, peace talks had been progressing. Well, they've not been progressing, but peace talks had been on with the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong. They'd been on for a while. But the communists realised by the time the peace talks actually got underway that they only had to wait. They'd seen the protests in America, they knew the American politicians were democratically elected, they knew the American politicians would have to remove America from the war eventually, because the American people would not vote for them if they didn't. So although they were at peace talks to talk about the potential for peace, the fighting was still going on, the Vietnamese were just going, no, we don't agree to that, and just making it so it dragged on and on and on. So Nixon had a plan to try to make the North Vietnamese come to peace, and his plan was to convince the North Vietnamese that he hated communism so much that he was going to act like a madman and drop nuclear bombs. And so this was called the madman theory. That's literally what it is. He was threatening the North that he would drop bombs on them, nuclear bombs, if the war continued as it was. And he hoped that would scare the North Vietnamese. And this is Nixon speaking. I call it the madman theory, Bob. I want the North Vietnamese to believe I've reached the point where I might do anything to stop the war. We'll just slip the word Nixon is obsessed about communism. We can't restrain him when he's angry, and he has his hand on the nuclear button. And then Ho Chi Minh himself will be in Paris in 2 days begging for peace. So, there's his other... It worked. The North Vietnamese called his bluff. And we have heard about why America got involved, and it's partly down to the Truman Doctrine, when President Truman, shortly after the Second World War, said it was the American people's duty to protect people around the world who are at risk of being forced to accept things they don't want to accept, effectively at risk of communism. Well, Nixon came up with his own doctrine. He said that the USA would honour any current defence commitments, but it would not commit any troops anywhere else. It was kind of a nothing statement. It was a political thing to get people to go, yeah, good idea. So he's saying, we're not going to abandon what we've already started and waste everything that's gone before, hinting at Vietnam, but we're not going to start anything new. That's what he says. And people are happy about this, generally. Then, in 1970 and 1971, Nixon, who was elected, you've seen his election video, I assume, in class, you can find it on YouTube if you haven't, elected to try to bring peace with honour, to end the war in Vietnam, honourably, in 1970 and 71, when 1970 invades Cambodia, and 1971 he invades Laos, both next to Vietnam. So he says when he's elected that he's going to get peace with honour. He says in the Nixon Doctrine, America's committed to its current defence commitments. It's not going anywhere, but it won't start anything new. And then he still invades Laos and Cambodia. Why does he do this? It's almost like one last big gamble, one last throw of the dice to try to end the war now. And he decided that one of the big reasons why they couldn't defeat the Viet Cong was the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So the Viet Cong were being supplied from the north on trails that went through the jungles in Laos and Cambodia. And Laos and Cambodia were particularly interested in trying to stop these trails. America bombed them from time to time, or quite a lot, but it was still not stopping the trails. So they invaded to try to destroy the Ho Chi Minh Trail and cut off the supply to South Vietnam. This sent chaos through America. They dropped 3 million tons of bombs on Cambodia. It's estimated that about 100,000 people were killed, 2 million made homeless in Cambodia, and a lot of those 100,000 completely innocent people. There was massive public outcry across America, loads of demonstrations, especially at colleges and universities. The young people were out. The US media were totally against this, saying this is the wrong thing. But despite all of this chaos going on around him, you'd think Nixon would go, oh, perhaps I shouldn't have done that. And his logic is, if I do one shot, like bang, it might force the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese to come to peace. Well, he called on the silent majority. He said, all these people kicking off and protesting, I want the people who are sat at home to support him. And actually, when they took polls of random groups of Americans, it did seem that a majority did sort of agree with what Nixon was doing, try and win the war, sort it out now, and then pull out. But it didn't really work. South Vietnamese troops were the main ones who invaded Laos, and they were kicked out quite easily. So far we've got Vietnamisation, didn't work, South Vietnamese not good enough. The madman theory, didn't work, the North Vietnamese were like calling his bluff, you're not going to drop nuclear bombs. And then we've got the invasion of Laos and Cambodia, which makes the war even bigger, and that also didn't work. So he tried one more thing. He tried Operation Linebacker. He was getting really, really annoyed that the North Vietnamese were not interested in making peace. So he authorised the American Air Force to basically bomb the hell out of North Vietnam. And it was called Operation Linebacker. That's definitely on your Quizlet. It was designed to make the North Vietnamese go, right, we want this to stop, so let's just make peace. For example, in the bombing of Hanoi and the northern port city of Haiphong, so the two key cities in the north, more than 1,600 civilians died. But in all of the bombing, 70 US airmen were killed or captured. So the North Vietnamese were shooting American planes out of the sky as well, with weapons they'd been given by the Soviet Union and China. And that didn't really work either, because it didn't force the North Vietnamese to come to peace. So he had all these ideas. Vietnamisation, madman theory, invade Laos and Cambodia, bomb the North. None of them really got what they want. I mean, maybe shortly after all of this, the North did make peace, but they never intended to keep that peace. They were just wanted America out. And they knew once America was gone, they weren't coming back, because to re-invade would have been so unpopular. So yeah, there you go, there's Nixon's policies.